All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're exploring one of the most critical turning points in Indian history, the massive uprising of 1857. This was a conflict that truly shook the British Empire to its very foundations. So our investigation is all about figuring out what caused this explosion. Was it just one single spark? Or was the whole place a tinderbox just waiting for a match? Let's find out.
So we're going to start with the immediate trigger, the moment it all just kicked off. And it all began with a simple, but as we'll see, an incredibly potent rumor. And really, that's the big question here, isn't it? It sounds almost impossible. How could a whisper, a rumor, lead to an all-out war? Well, to get how that happened, you first have to understand the people who were right at the center of this storm.
Okay, meet the sepoys. These were the Indian soldiers who were, and this is no exaggeration, the absolute backbone of the British East India Company's army. They were trained, professional soldiers, but their loyalty, well, it was about to be tested in a way that none of them could have ever seen coming.
And this is the object that lit the fuse. The brand new Enfield rifle. Now, in 1856, the British brought this in to replace the older muskets. But here's the thing. The problem wasn't the gun itself. Oh no, it was the bullets. So here's how it worked. To load the new rifle, you had to bite open a paper cartridge that was coated in grease. And a rumor started spreading like wildfire that this grease was made from the fat of cows and pigs. Now, for the Hindu sepoys, the cow is sacred. For the Muslim sepoys, the pig is unclean. This wasn't just some inconvenient order. To them, this was a deliberate, calculated attack on their deepest-held religious beliefs. It was the ultimate insult. But as explosive as that rumor was, it was still just the spark. You see, it landed in a tinderbox. A tinderbox just packed with grievances that had been piling up for more than 100 years. Let's take a look at all the fuel that was already lying around waiting for a flame. A huge part of that fuel was pure economic devastation. British policies weren't just competitive, they systematically tore apart India's local economies. These traditional cottage industries, which were the lifeblood for so many people, were basically wiped out, leaving behind nothing but poverty and hardship. And the scale of this was just immense. It wasn't just one group of people feeling the pain. You had artisans going bankrupt because they couldn't compete with cheap British goods. You had peasants being crushed under impossible taxes. Even the local nobility, the landed aristocracy, were having their lands seized. This economic pain cut across every single level of Indian society. And all of this boils down to a really important concept called the drain of wealth. You gotta understand, this wasn't fair trade. It was a one-way street. India's vast resources, its riches, were being systematically siphoned off to England, making Britain wealthier while making India poorer. Now, running right alongside all that economic pain was this deep, gnawing fear for their culture and their religion. The British didn't just rule, they judged. They'd openly criticize and denounce Hindu and Muslim customs. Christian missionaries were everywhere, creating a whole lot of suspicion. And then they passed a law that said if you converted to Christianity, you could still inherit family property, which to many looked like a clear bribe to abandon your faith. And if we go back to the army itself, well, the inequality was just staggering. An Indian sepoy, didn't matter how brave or talented he was paid a tiny fraction of what his British counterpart earned. We're talking less than an eighth of the salary. And promotion? Forget about it. You were pretty much stuck. It wasn't just unfair. It was a daily, grinding humiliation. And then came what felt like the final insult. This new act forced sepoys to agree to serve overseas if they were ordered to. For a lot of high-caste Hindus, crossing the ocean was a major taboo. It meant losing your caste, your place in society. It was yet another direct hit on their religious identity, coming from the very people they served. So you've got this tinderbox, right? It's overflowing with economic pain, social fears, and military grievances. And then the spark of the greased cartridge hits it, and the whole thing just erupts into a wildfire. Now let's see just how fast and how far that fire spread. And man, did things escalate quickly. It starts in February with a simple refusal. By March, you have Mangal Pandey's famous attack on his officers, but the real tipping point came in May, in a town called Meerut. 85 sepoys who refused the cartridges were publicly shamed and thrown in jail. For their comrades, that was it. That was the last straw. The very next day, they rose up, freed the prisoners, and started marching on Delhi. The rebellion was officially on.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just a soldier's mutiny anymore, not by a long shot. All across northern and central India, local leaders and rulers who had been pushed aside by the British rose up to join the fight. This wasn't some centrally planned operation. It was a wave of connected uprisings led by powerful figures trying to win back everything they'd lost. And here they are, the faces of that resistance. People like Begum Hazrat Mahal and Nana Saheb. They became these incredibly powerful symbols, these rallying points that turned what started as a sepoy revolt into a huge, popular rebellion against foreign rule.
The British did eventually manage to suppress the uprising, and they did it with brutal force. But what did it all mean in the end? Was this just a chaotic mutiny, or was it something more? Let's dig into the aftermath and how people have looked back on it.
Now, this is a really powerful way of looking at it. Years later, Indian nationalists like V.D. Savarkar started to reframe the entire event. They argued it wasn't a mutiny at all. They called it the First War of Independence, a unified, conscious struggle by the people of India to throw off the chains of colonial rule.
And the fallout from this was enormous. The East India Company was completely dissolved. The British Crown stepped in and took direct control of India. But the legacy was complicated. The British were terrified by the unity they saw between Hindus and Muslims, so they started a new policy of divide and rule to keep them apart. But at the same time, the heroes of 1857, people like Rani Laxmi Bai, became legends, inspiring generations of freedom fighters for years to come.
So, in the end, even though the rebellion was crushed, it was anything but a failure. It fundamentally changed the game. It transformed British rule and planted the seeds for a modern Indian nationalist movement. The uprising of 1857 proved that the mighty British Empire was not invincible. A spark was lit, and even though it was stamped out, it left behind a burning ember that would, eventually, help bring down an entire empire.